So Jesse lived in the city of Bethlehem. And that is why Joseph and Mary, who were of the house and lineage of David, had to go back to the city of Bethlehem. In Luke 1:27, Gabriel came to Galilee, to the city of Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, who was of the house of what? David. In chapter 3, you have the same great truth. 3:31, after all of those names are given, from verse 23 on through 31, it says finally in verse 31, which was the son of Nathan, which was the son of whom? Which was the son of what? So there is no question about Joseph and Mary being of the house of David and of the lineage of David. And that's why they had to return to Bethlehem by order of the king to be enrolled, to be numbered. And verse 5 of Luke 2 says, and to be numbered or enrolled with Mary, his espoused wife. The word espoused is not used in two of the Aramaic texts. You know, to be an espoused wife is not necessary. If you're a wife, you're a wife. If you're espoused, you're espoused, you know. Soup is soup and apple butter is what? Right. And therefore the word espoused is not necessary. To be enrolled with Mary, his what? For they were already married. You know, they'd gone through the ceremony, but she was great with child, ready to have the delivery of that child. Verse 6, and so it was that while they were there in Bethlehem, the city of David, the days were accomplished or completed that she should be delivered, that she should give birth. And she, verse 7, brought forth her what? Firstborn son. Brought forth her what? Firstborn. Jesus Christ is God's only begotten Son. John 3:16. God so what? Loved the world that he gave his what? Only begotten Son. Jesus Christ was God's only begotten Son, but not Mary's. The word says she brought forth her what? Firstborn son. That means she must have had other sons later. Because if you have a firstborn, that tells me you must have a what? Secondborn. Otherwise, that firstborn would be your only begotten. You talk about the accuracy of the word and the beauty of it. Tremendous, people. Was her firstborn son. In the Gospel of Matthew, keep your finger in Luke, but in Matthew 13, in verse 55, the word says, is not this what? The carpenter's son, is not his mother called what? And his what? Brethren, James, Joseph, Simon, and what? 4 boys there. And his sisters. And the word for sisters here is more than 2. Are they not all with us? So the record in Luke chapter 2 simply tells us the truth that Jesus Christ, that Mary brought forth her firstborn son, Jesus Christ. Her firstborn son. And that little comma after the word son in verse 7, the period of time in there. And there's something occurred there that is not mentioned at this particular location in the word, because after the comma come the words, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. Now we know from Oriental custom, culture, biblical culture, that whenever a child was born who was a prince, who was scheduled to become the king, that child would always have to be washed with water that had salt in it. That child had to be cleaned up after birth with water that had a small amount of salt in it, because every prince born to be a king had to be salted. That's why, if you look at Ezekiel, chapter 16, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know how screwed up she is, her abomination. That's verse 2. And say, verse 3, Ezekiel 16:3, and say, Thus saith the Lord God unto Jerusalem, Thy birth and thy nativity, your origin, is of the land of Canaan. Thy father was an Amorite, and your mother was a Hittite. And as for thy origin, thy nativity, in the day that thou wast born, thy navel was not cut, neither wast thou washed in water to supple thee. Thou wast not salted at all, nor what? Swaddled. That's why he said, you're so lousy. That when you were born, you weren't salted, you weren't swaddled. That's what the prophet said. So every time a child was born as a prince who was to be king, he had to be salted. And it's real interesting that this word salted is also used regarding your life and mine in the book of Colossians, in the church epistle of Colossians, chapter 4. Chapter 4 of Colossians, verse 6. Let your speech be what? Always with grace, seasoned with what? Salt. That ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. To be salted meant that this prince who was born to be king, that his words would always be salted. He would mean what he would say, and he would say what he would mean. Today, I think people need to get salted. Would help a little bit occasionally if they really did it and believed it. But that's why this verse 7 of Luke 2, she brought forth her firstborn son, and before she wrapped him in swaddling clothes, they had to clean him up. He just got born. They took care of his navel. They washed him up real nice, real clean, with a little bit of salt in the water, so that he would be salted, so that when he, the prince, would become the king, his words would mean what he would say, and he would say what he would mean. That's why a prince had to be salted, and that's why Jesus Christ was salted. Now, after the salting, a prince had to go through something else, and that's the rest of the verse here. Wrapped him in swaddling clothes. Swaddling clothes. Swaddling clothes were strips of linen-like material that when this prince was born and they'd salted him, dried him off, then they would wrap him from the top of his head to the soles of his feet, leaving his little mouth and nose open so he could breathe. And that was indicative that when he would become king, he would always walk straight and upright before the people. In the days of Ezekiel, the people had wandered far away from God, and the leader of the people who had caused the wandering away, the word says, he was not salted, neither was he swaddled. Jesus Christ was salted when he was born, and he was swaddled. And then he was laid in a manger. The word is aoria, A-O-R-I-A. The manger is not the kind of manger that I was brought up with here at New Knoxville in the barn where we kept the horses or where we kept the cows. The manger was basically just the feeding area for the animals. I'll say this platform up here is the stable. Then the feeding area would be back over here, would be the feeding area. This is where they would feed the animals. And when Jesus Christ was born, after she had wrapped him in swaddling clothes, Joseph and Mary laid him in the manger, in the area where the animals were fed. And the reason they had to do that is because there was no room at the inn. There was no room for them in the inn. Now that is very significant to me and to all of us who are interested in the integrity and accuracy of the Word. We have just learned earlier that he was of the house and the lineage of whom? David. And he had gone, Joseph and Mary had gone back for the enrollment by order of Caesar Augustus. And Jesus Christ was born in the city of David, Bethlehem. And he was born in a stable where there was a manger. And the reason was because they had no room in the inn proper. You know, in the Holiday Inn or something. No room for them in that inn. So this is why he was born in that stable and laid in that manger area. But he was of the house and the lineage of David. There's a record in 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 19:31. I want to start with. And Barzillai. See the word, verse 31? Barzilla. Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Roglim and went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over to Jordan. Now, Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old, and he had provided the king with food of sustenance while he lay at this other town. For this Barzillai was a very great man, a rich man, a wealthy man. And the king said unto Barzillai, Come thou over with me, and I will feed thee with me in Jerusalem. And Barzillai said unto the king, How long have I to live that I should go up with the king unto Jerusalem. I am this day 80 years old, and can I discern between good and evil? Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more of the voice of singing men and singing? Wherefore then should thy servant be yet a burden unto my lord the king? Thy servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king, and why should the king recompense it me with such a reward? Let thy servant, I pray thee, turn back again, that I may die in my own city and be buried by the grave of my father, my mother. And behold, thy servant Chimham, 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 let him go over with my lord the king, and do to him what shall seem good unto thee. And the king answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do to him that which shall seem good unto thee. And whatsoever thou shalt require of me, that will I do for thee. And all the people went over Jordan. And when the king was come over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned unto his own place. Then the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah conducted the king, and also half the people of Israel. And behold, verse 41, all the men of Israel came to the king and said unto the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household, and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, behold, cause the king is near of kin to us. Wherefore then be ye angry for this matter? Have we eaten all the kings at the king's expense? Hath he given us any gifts? And so this goes on. And what happens here is that the king gives a property to this man, Chimham.